I make quite a few arguments throughout my articles over the last few years in that vein. And I certainly, when it comes to this subject matter, there's quite a few doubtful bits of information out there that are full of weird stuff. There's a lot of Nephilim baloney out there and all that Anunnaki type stuff, which I think largely, for the most part, is bull. But there are definite instances of references that you can find in Plato, for example, which I've done a lot of reading in Plato. So you can read the Phaedo. I have an article about Plato's treatment of crystals and dimensions in Plato's Phaedo, or the Phaedrus. And because at the end of the dialogue, Socrates tells the people he's dialoguing with, he says, look, what I'm going to tell you, you're not going to understand or believe. He says, but there are higher levels of reality where, he says, there are colors beyond the color spectrum that we know. So how Socrates knew this, 2,000 years ago in Greece, over 2,000 years ago in Greece, who knows? There is in the Timaeus mention of the minute structure of reality almost at the subatomic level, and I think we touched on this last time. And Werner Heisenberg, in some of his quantum physics works, says, look, at the subatomic level, we see Platonic forms. We see geometric structure and form. We don't see pure atomism or materialism. And he says there's just no question about it that at that level of reality, we are looking at some sort of information fabric or structure, right? So that is apparently true. In my opinion, that is how they were able to build things like the internet and how virtual reality works and computer theory and all that is essentially based on Platonism. So, I think it's an open question. I really do. And I don't think that commits me to any outlandish New Age type of situation where I have to accept that, that historic Atlantis was some sort of space colony necessarily. Right. But we do see in, like I said, in Plato's works, the Timaeus, Phaedo, he talks about, again, that in these other levels of reality, there are, other beings, he even says in the Phaedo. So, there's just no way that would have been known, especially when it comes to the Timaeus discussing the actual way that reality is made, in geometric forms, right? And he's talking about from the smallest level of reality up to, the biggest, I guess, which are called gnomons, with this idea of the way a fractal works, where or a hologram, where the initial image is made up of a whole bunch of little bitty images of the same thing. That's the ancient Greek principle of gnomon, which is Gnomon. It's a Pythagorean concept. So, there's just no way that they would have known that at that time. And I should add as well that in the Timaeus, Socrates says that Solon went to Egypt and obtained this information about the universe and how the universe is constructed. Mm-hmm. And he said this was the secret teaching of the priests of Egypt, right? So we talked about Egypt last time. But that's explicitly what he says in the Timaeus. And when we look at Egyptology from, as I mentioned last time, Wim van den Dongen, his work very well explicates, I think, the correlation between these sort of numeric principles and geometric principles that undergird Platonism, even at, an atomic level. So if you look at something like a benzene ring and that hexagonal structure that it has, this is the kind of stuff that the Pythagoreans were talking about.
Yeah, and how did they know that without
Right.
scanning electron microscopes and all that?
Right.
So you
Now,
you,
just to play the skeptic, I've been pondering this quite a bit the last few years. The only thing I could come up with, if you were a skeptic, would be to say, well, the Greeks had this idea that reality was made this way, and everything kind of worked in this Platonic mirror structure. So they just assumed that everything had to be that way, even at a small minutia level. That's the only rationalist explanation that I could think of, but that doesn't explain things like Socrates talking about the color spectrum being far beyond what we see with our senses.
and just come out and just make a flat out statement to that effect, and then
Absolutely.
unequivocally stating that that's the way it is, and then how many years later it gets confirmed with modern science and all that. And
yeah, I'm a little iffy though on Atlantis, because if you read the Platonic dialogues where it comes up, it's not really described as like some sort of space colony.
no.
I mean, there's talk of the gods being there, of course, but Plato talks about the gods being in Greece too. So it's a long debated subject as to what ontological status Plato gave to the gods, whether they were merely stand-ins for sort of hermetic mathematical principles like in Pythagoreanism or Egyptology, or whether he saw them as just sort of maybe these rational personalizations of forces of nature, or I don't know, or whether he actually did think that there were gods, because we see statements sort of to both effects at different times. Like at the end of some dialogues, Socrates says, "I'm going to sacrifice an animal to the gods because that's what I need to do because I believe in the gods."
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's a like I said, debated topic, but I don't think that Plato's discussion of Atlantis justifies the notion of what's called, some people call paleo history or paleo technology. But there are other instances that I think do suggest that.
Yeah, and then there's all the myths about in a lot of different cultures, from what I understand, some different stuff I've read about, where it is all over the world in various different cultures, the story of having these gods come down.
Exactly. Yeah, the visitations of the gods. That's a good one. I mean, it's a universal belief. Another good one is, well, I don't know if this is a good one, but here's just one to throw out, just as a thought experiment. And I'm not saying that I necessarily believe this, but just consider it for the purpose of consideration. The Bible does, in Genesis 6, talk about the intermixing of the angelic, the Malachim, and the sons of God and women. I'm sure everybody's probably heard of this in conspiracy.
Yeah, Genesis 6.
Right. So we all know about that. And now, my understanding, I have put a lot of time into biblical theology and history of Genesis and so forth. The classic view of that text, even amongst Orthodox Judaism, is that it is talking about angels. Okay, so it's not just the godly sons of Abel and Seth. Now, when we look at that in consideration with other texts like Jude, where Jude references the Book of Enoch and references Genesis 6 with the illicit intermixing of the angelic and the human, the comparison is made between bestiality or unnatural human relations and whatever these angelic beings have done, right? So there's a violation of what was proper to their nature. So just as a human shouldn't engage in sodomy or bestiality, it's likened to the sin of the angels, according to Jude, who explicitly references the Book of Enoch.
And it's talking about
just one last point here, real quick.
Yeah, okay.
What I wonder, again, just speculating, and there is some precedent possibly for this in a lot of, say, church fathers. Is it possible that the notion of the mixing, which we get the impression led to genetic oddities, right? So even if we ascribe all this as mythology, right, let's say you take that argument, it's odd that the artistic representation of so many ancient cultures in terms of their henotheism or polytheism, their gods, why do so many of them have these sort of genetic aberrations, right? So they have a hawk head or whatever.
All right.
Even if that's all fake, we are now in the present reality of the actual cross-species engineering.
Right, yeah.
So the reality is actually coming. So to me, it doesn't seem that far-fetched that, either this really was some sort of an angelic mixing, some sort of forbidden angelic kind of technology or knowledge or gnosis or whatever, or it was just a mythological principle that, in the same way of Socrates, somehow man had, I don't know how, but had some sense that you could do this eventually, that you could discover other colors of the color spectrum, that you could mix animal and human hybrids and mix genetic information to create chimeras. So I just don't see how you could easily dismiss that.
No, I agree. There's a lot of stuff that it makes sense in if you take the view that maybe there was a catastrophic why can't I say that word, catastrophic event at some point in history, like the Bible describes the Great Flood, and there seems to be a lot of evidence for that, throughout the world. The earth was covered with water.
Yeah, I agree with the universal flood, and it's, you look at all the pagan texts, the ancient Near Eastern documents with Enki and Enlil and all that stuff backs up the universal flood for sure.
Yeah, and then maybe the god legends or something. Maybe I don't know. Maybe there were literal angels, or it is descriptive of something of where this legendary status got put on just mortal men that were had possession of this ancient technology that pretty much got wiped out when the earth was wiped clean, and so they had this holdovers from that past era that's gone. There's no remnant of it that's noticeable or readily apparent to people living today. So
now that interesting, because that would be the rationalist answer. Blah blah blah. The gods were just actually stand-ins for humans who had advanced technology or something like that. But I think, in my opinion, I'm not trying to be contrary to you, but that kind of begs the question: aren't we back at some sort of Madame Blavatsky view at that point, where there's like all these successive ages of men and different races of? In other words, that answer actually isn't very rational in terms of the rationalist explaining a way of things, in my opinion.
So this infinite regression of civilizations, and I don't subscribe to that at all. But no, I don't discount the whole idea. Maybe there's angelic visitation and all that. I tend to think that maybe something like that probably did happen.
I think so too. And like we talked about last time, how is that any less rational than the explanation of all these multiverse and interdimensional beings? That's no more rational that and panspermia than the idea of angelic visitations.
Well, but see, that's not science, though, Jay. That's the difference.
Right, because science is just as elastic as democracy.
Absolutely. It's funny when you get into discussions with people about, so-called science. When you're talking about multiverse, I didn't really mean to. I was just, making some comments about and I was kind of poking a little bit of fun about the multiverse and all that. I was just making a statement to the effect that, so if you're a believer in the multiverse, then you would have to accept the existence of unicorns or Bigfoot or, because you definitely can't rule them out, right? And I guess I hit a hot button with a lot of people, and they, so it got shit tons of comments back on that, and but I like doing it because it kind of gets an idea of where people's minds are at on some of this stuff, and then this guy just recently come back with the answer that science is allowed to invoke limitless unseen universes, even though in the previous any discussion of a supernatural or something is that is outside of the realm of science.
Right.
Now all of a sudden that's been completely turned inside out to where you can invoke limitless universes. I mean,
now I make the argument in several papers on this very point that you're discussing, that what's going on here is ultimately it's not so much that the rationalist, scientistic, materialist, reductionist, physicalist has a problem with the mysterious or even possibly just almost kind of the supernatural. They just don't want to use that term. What they actually have a problem with is personalism. So they don't mind these fanciful sci-fi creative ideas about other dimensions and all that, all these beings, space beings or whatever. You just can't have the idea that the highest level of reality is personal. So I make the argument that the ultimate metaphysical divide between someone like, say, myself or Richard Dawkins or any person of that opinion would be that they believe that ultimate reality is impersonal. So the guiding principle of reality at its highest level is irrational and impersonal. So there's nothing guiding the universe. There's no purpose or telos that pervades all of reality. The ultimate principle in that view has to be chaotic, right? So objective reality at that point is not meaningful inherently. It's only meaningful insofar as rebellious, fallen, autonomous man projects his own finite will to power onto reality. And so that's why they have the technocratic scientific view, because they have a problem with personalism. And that's also why Huxley, for example, in as I think I touched on last time, perennial philosophy, he says the absolute is fine. Believe in the absolute. We don't care, just so long as it's impersonal.
Right. Well, notice how elegantly, or maybe not so elegantly, but how that fits with your statist religion, which is I've come to the conclusion that statism is a religion, and that it is the predominant religion. I think it is even to many religious people who purport to be Christians or whatever their faith happens to be. I think that from my observation, at least, it's that the religion of the state is something that is like never questioned. It's something that not even is brought into the discussion of any question of its legitimacy. And then, there's this materialistic, naturalistic philosophy of things, I think fits well with that because, like you said, well, you could believe in any absolutes as long as they're not personal. Well, that puts mankind being the ultimate, product of evolution, or, as being the pinnacle of the current
right.
material world, right? So then that would lend credence to the idea that out of humankind, the ones who are at the top of the social order are
exactly.
the ones
right.
who have, they have a right to rule the lesser by nature.
Yeah, because personalism is not something, or the philosophy or theological belief of personhood is not something inherent in you or conferred upon you by any god. In the statist collective, personalism is accrued to you, granted to you by the state, and ultimately for the collectivists, when you reach a certain age, which allows them to have abortions up to, say, age 3. Because until you're useful to the social system, you're not accorded personhood. And there are plenty of Western philosophers who have posited these kinds of ideas. Even Hegel sort of hints at this, that personhood is actually sort of granted to you by your participation in the dialectical process in some way. All the way up to Peter Singer, who doesn't accord personhood to anyone over like age 3 or 4. I forget exactly what, but yes, exactly, all the same idea. And again, the denial of personhood is ultimately just a tool of granting personhood only to the technocratic elite, which is right. Why they're going to have all the things that you want. So you're going to take the vaccines, you're going to do all that, you're going to get the statist brainwashing education. They're going to live as Galton, I think, says, as wild men.
Right, and they keep themselves in the more natural state while they want to alter and what is the statement? Perfect that which has been left imperfect. I think that's one of the stated goals of the occult science or occult orders. Yeah,
and you're not going to have offspring. You're going to live in the big Walmart in a plastic coffin in a big Walmart city run by a computer, if they let you live. But they're going to live out in an estate in the country. Right,
because that is their birthright to do so, because, we're all just animals and a product of evolution, and yes. They are at the top of this, genetic lottery.
Which they've determined themselves.
Which they determine, they set all this criteria for what who's worthy and who's not, and oddly that it is why I try to frequently point that out, that it is an extension of statism. The scientism and the materialism and all that is an extension of that, and those two things work hand in glove, and I mean that's why you see it in all these different government established institutions of your university system and museums that are taxpayer funded and all that, and of course public school, can't forget that, and
absolutely,
and the idea that Christians seem to have of we need to lobby Congress or something, or we need to attend school board meetings so we can get intelligent design taught in school and stuff like that. As well, it will only happen as long as it serves the status agenda, and they want to switch over to some model of panspermia or something.
Panspermia
like that.
is intelligent design, so that
right, yeah, that's what I say. And then there's a lot of quotes from Francis Crick, and then even Richard Dawkins has said something to that effect, and these different high levels, people promoting scientism. That they're definitely not nipping around the edges of it anymore. They're just kind of directly coming out with it. That this idea of panspermia and all that.
Yeah, and all the gender psyops and attacks that we're seeing are also classed under the attack on personhood. So it's not just, in my estimation, one of the criticisms I have of a lot of the libertarian or natural right, quote-unquote, philosophy. Not that that's completely incorrect, but if we are relying on people like John Locke and these guys that are not very good philosophers for our social contract and all this kind of stuff as a theological basis or philosophical basis for our rights, these are faulty presuppositions, faulty starting points. They're not good places to start because, number one, it's bad philosophy. But it's also not accurate in terms of, in my view, theology, in terms of creation and what personhood is. So the attack on, for example, in Genesis, when Noah is discussing, when God's telling Noah why killing humans is wrong, he says, because man was made in the image of God. So the attack on a human person is an indirect attack on the divine persons. So, excuse me, there is a sense in which personhood is only exists communally. If a person, for example, has a Trinitarian view of the world, and in that regard, human persons model the divine society in that regard, in terms of interpersonal connections, being a mirror of divine interpersonal connections. But we don't swing to the end of the dialectic like the modern atheists and philosophers do, by saying that personhood is only defined by some sort of collective social philosophy. And that's what they do. They define it solely through a collective group philosophy where you're accorded personhood by the state, essentially.
Yeah, and then how really unscientific that is, as far as the law. There's the laws of cause and effect, right? And those are established laws of science. Like with a statement that no effect can be greater than its cause.
Or how about this? For the progressive left types, we're supposed to believe that you're born gay, right? But a person is not born a person.
Right.
And their gender is also something that's not determined by the chromosomes, which actually it is. Right. So that's completely irrational, completely contradictory. But in that worldview of relativism, who cares if they're contradictory? You believe anything.
Yeah, and then that's exactly what that guy was saying in the YouTube comments. He was coming back with it. Science is allowed to contradict itself because it is always searching for a better model of things. So in the process, it may contradict itself, and that's just science. And then later on, it corrects itself, and then but then it's like, okay, but then how does that lend itself to any particular dogma, or how do you establish any kind of any type of philosophy about the nature of reality based on something that is constantly in a state of flux.
Exactly, and that's that argument I gave earlier about ultimate reality being either based on some objective metaphysical principle that relates to personalism. You can transfer that same argument to epistemology, which is the philosophy of knowledge, or how we know things or come to know things. And you can say, well, look, if your worldview, your presuppositions are that ultimate reality is constantly in flux, then there's no stability to the philosophy of neo-Darwinianism. The philosophy itself has to be in flux. This is a really pretty simple, basic argument. It's not that complex of an argument. It may sound a little obtuse if you're new to it, but it's very simple, it's very clear, and it's just based on basic philosophical principles of saying, look, either you believe in some form of metaphysical absolute that's personal, some sort of God, or you believe that the highest level of reality is either unknown, unknowable, and therefore also, in some sense, just chaotic, or there's no unifying principle. Is really what it boils down to, a unifying metaphysical principle. And so none of those other views offer that or have that. And then what happens of necessity is that the rest of their system, their view, even if they might get some aspects of things right, you might have a neo-Darwinian biologist who studies the earthworm and gets things right about it, Nevertheless, he has no ability to make sense of how this thing means anything, or how it fits into any kind of structure of classification that has anything meaningful, right? Because if we go back to Aristotle, he's the origin of the classification systems for biology that are used even still today. Aristotle, for his faults, at least believed in universals. Now, he made, I think, a big error in moving away from Plato's conception of universals having some sort of transcendent status, and instead collapsed everything transcendent into the here and now, which is the step towards empiricism and materialism, in my view. But he still recognized the importance of what in philosophy is called the problem of universals. And so I actually had I don't mean to ramble on, but I'll just make this real quick. I had an argument with some guys in a philosophy forum the other day about this, and they were just going nuts because everybody in it was, a hardcore physico-materialist, and I was just making a simple point that, look, you can't make that argument that everything is purely material, because that argument itself, if we take that phrase, that proposition, and we put that into a very simple, basic example of formal logic, what you're doing is making a universal statement that contradicts the proposition itself in what it claims. So you're saying that all reality is purely material, and all knowledge can only be known through empirical sense data. Neither of those claims can actually prove what they're claiming themselves. In other words, the claim itself cannot be substantiated based on what the claim claims. if that makes sense. Because it makes a universal claim. Once you make a universal claim, and then you say that we can only know things through sense experience, well, you're out of luck, because there's no amount of sense experience that can ever give you the status of a universal claim or universal knowledge.
Right, that's where this stuff starts to break down. It's like the commenter was saying, well, the science, is allowed to contradict itself, but science in quotes, this sort of which is not science. It's not based on observation or it's really based on just assertions and conjecture and stuff. It's not really. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing that could, because if they had something that they could point to and say, oh, here's a measurement or here's something, that they certainly would, but they don't do that. Especially like the multiverse or something like that. But okay, so they can contradict themselves, but logic can't. Like, so that's like what you just got through saying is like where you're taking and applying logic, and where you start to take the fundamentals of logic and try to apply it to one of these assertions or some of this conjecture,
right?
And I think we're getting at the point now with these philosophical aspects of these sciences stuff where you're seeing where it has definitely hit a wall, where it is now to the point where there's this grasping at straws to the point where they're having to invoke something as absurd as limitless, virtually unlimited number of unseen, untestable universes where anything is possible. Now that is about as far afield as you can go, to the extreme of trying to get something that has some kind of explanatory power for what you observe in front of you and the reality that we're experiencing right now.
The other irony is that all of the supposed explanatory power that they believe that their theses have, that's actually illusory. And here's why it's illusory. Yes. It's illusory because of what we sometimes call the determinist fallacy. And what this is that if I have the belief that everything that I'm thinking, all my propositions in my head, beliefs, are only a product of determined causal chains of chemical reactions, then the truths that I think that I'm understanding about the world are not actually truths about the external world. They're merely chemical reactions in my head.
Right. And here's something else, Jay. It's that, okay, so you have this opposition to religion that is supposedly tied into this, materialistic philosophy based on so-called science. And now you have this enmity between so-called science and religion. Well, what you just got through saying is definitely, no doubt, their position where, whatever human behavior that you can observe is just simply a product of these chemical reactions and materialistic determinism, where that is something that is inset into the nature of material itself. Well, that would also include religion.
Correct.
Religion is within that framework. So the existence of and religion, there's religions in some form through all cultures throughout. It's something that's it's basically universal. It's basically a given in the human experience to have this urge to worship or to recognize.
It would make all claims essentially meaningless, because you're saying in a meaningless universe, a meaningless causal chain of reactions calls me to have these beliefs in my head that I'm learning about the natural world, and I've learned the proposition. This is what I was asking these guys. I was like, look, just take this proposition itself, and the guy said, free will is an illusion. Everything is a determined material process. I said, okay, that sentence itself, free will is an illusion. Everything is a determined materialistic process. Your belief, that proposition in your head, also is part of that determined physical process. And so the beliefs that you have, those propositions, they're just as illusory as what you're saying about free will.
Right. And they were randomly generated, right?
Exactly. It's all chaos. Meaningless chaos. And so then also any invention that you have in your head about delineating between some sort of standard of which things are rational and are irrational, that's also irrational. So there's nothing rational about this position. It's complete nonsense, and it's that easy to tear it down too. You'll never lose this debate because they have no answer for that. So it's an all-encompassing, and the reason for that is because they don't understand the force of the claim that they start with. Right. They want their cake and to eat it too. So they want to have this all-encompassing starting point that they think eviscerates all religious claims. But they don't realize that claim itself is actually a religious claim. in the sense that it cannot be empirically justified or made sense of logically in the way that they conceive empiricism and logic to work. So it's all nonsense.
Right. It's just, like I said, it's just some assertion that gets made. And then I guess the hope is, when they make that assertion, is that it will go unchallenged. And in the larger realm of the university structure and television, movies, public school system, like it goes unchallenged every day, and then it gets. But see, it is not something that has the number of adherents that it does, because of its, the weight of its arguments or its proofs or its evidence. It is through psychic driving,
yes,
and psychological techniques that it is widely accepted. And if you doubt that, just start to, go through those things that you were just talking about to anybody that subscribes to those beliefs, and then you'll see them essentially have a meltdown where they don't know how.
Yeah, they go nuts. Yeah, I've had that debate probably 200 times in my life, that very debate. You can also point out that all the math that they believe is their property, they own math and science and technology.
Right.
Well, the fact that we can build computers and rockets and all these things based on algorithms and these mathematical principles shows that these abstract principles, which are not material, are in some way mystically operant in the world. They work out there in the world, right?
Right.
Now, that means that in some way, these abstract concepts, numbers, principles, interact in a world of flux, such that they are not subject to constant change and flux. How that exactly happens, I don't think any human really knows. We don't know all the mysteries of mathematics and why the world works this way, but it does work that way. So the irony here is that the pragmatism and empiricism that they think they own actually backs up what I would believe. Right? I mean, it makes sense on my worldview how it is mathematical formulas don't change over time. They're invariant and they're conceptual, they're immaterial, yet they function consistently in regularity in nature through induction to build these things consistently. Right? We don't have to keep changing algorithms to build some equation for building a bridge because we think that tomorrow 2 + 2 will be 5. Right. So there's an assumed regularity for that. And it's not a regularity that we know based on any kind of empirical data, because it's not empirical. Mathematics has an empirical dimension to it. But a good way to refute, there's another debate I had last year with a bunch of guys in a math group, and they were empiricists. And I was like, how can you guys be empiricists, rank materialist empiricists, and consider yourselves into math theory and mathematics? These two things are complete opposites. He said, because, whatever their rambling answers were. But I said, look, there's a kiliogon, which is a 1,000-sided figure. No human being can have an empirical experience of all of these angles at any one time. You could zoom in on your computer and look at one little angle. Right. But you can never have a full empirical, visual, spatio-temporal experience of the fullness of a kiliogon. And yet this is a geometric form. Now that alone should be enough to show that empiricism is not true, because it's something that's obviously a real geometrical entity, if you will, that we do not empirically experience. And there are a host of other things that you can throw in as well, like Georg Cantor's arguments for various infinities, right? I mean, zero or infinity, these are not empirical realities. And there's no way to, if somebody says, well, yeah, I turn the number 8 on its side, and that stands for, you're right, but that's the symbol, that's not infinity. So we know infinity is an actual mathematical concept. We know that it's real, it works, it's used in different sciences, but it's not something empirical. So that alone ought to be enough, you would think, to show the foolishness of that kind of position. But they don't. I mean, they don't really care, because it's not really a position interested in what's actually true. It's more of a, like I said, a will to power kind of idea.
Yeah, and that's scientism, right? That's how scientism is defined. Where it's this belief that the scientific method or the scientific process you can come to any conclusion about any truth there is to know about anything through that process. And I mean, you just gave some examples where no, really you can't. It is just a lot of things only exist conceptually,
right?
And that is another thing, that the very fact that things can exist conceptually and not materially, and then before they become a material reality, they can exist in a conceptual realm until they're acted upon by, which is always the case, a conscious sentient mind that can take the conceptual reality and make it into material reality. And that is something you observe on a regular basis every day. When you see architecture, you see an automobile,
right.
You see right, anything that began as a conceptual entity and then was made into reality through a process of applied learning or taking and
Here. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, you see what I'm getting at. I'm kind of belaboring the point, but yeah.
Here's some great quotes from some of the world's most renowned mathematicians. Roger Penrose, for example, discussing the Mandelbrot set. He says the complete details of the complication of the structure of Mandelbrot set cannot be fully comprehended by any human, nor can it be fully revealed by any computer. It would seem that this structure is not just part of our mind, but it has a reality of its own. The computer is being used in essentially the same way that the experimental physicist uses a piece of experimental apparatus to explore the structure of the physical world. The Mandelbrot set is not an invention of the human mind, which is what all of these materialists think. It was a discovery. Like Mount Everest, the Mandelbrot set is just there. Now, there's another great quote by, I believe it's Gödel. Let's see what he says. This is Penrose again. I imagine that whenever the mind perceives a mathematical idea, it makes contact with Plato's world of mathematical concepts. When one sees a mathematical truth, one's consciousness breaks through into this realm of ideas. It makes direct contact with it. When a mathematician communicates, this is made possible by each one. When mathematicians communicate, this is made possible by each one having a direct route to truth. The consciousness of each person is able to perceive these mathematical truths directly through a process of seeing. Since each can make contact with this Platonic realm directly, they can more readily communicate with one another. The mental images that each one has when making this Platonic contact might be rather different in each case, but the communication is possible because each is directly in contact with the same externally existing realm of forms. Now, I have argued this for years, so I was, of course, elated to see Roger Penrose make that argument. He even says, it is a feeling not uncommon amongst artists that in their greatest works they are revealing eternal truths, which have some kind of prior ethereal existence. I cannot help feeling that with mathematics, the case for believing in some kind of ether or eternal existence is a good deal stronger.
Right. It is. Well, then there exists too the golden ratio that it's also observable in the natural world, repeated over and over in different applications. And what I was talking about with things existing in conceptual reality, in order to bring them into material existence, you go through a process of dialoguing internally. You have this sort of ongoing dialogue is in your conscious, or you're maybe even invoking your subconscious mind, to where you have to take things through a process which involves a particular precise order, or maybe not exactly always a particular order, but take an example of building a house or a building or a structure. You have to do things in a particular order. You lay the foundation first, and then you go through another process. There's a whole process related to that has to be done in a certain order, and then it is always what I guess what I'm getting at it's always a product of mind or consciousness. Like that sort of thing can't be arrived at through any other observed, and then here we go with observation, which is supposedly what science is based on. And so you could take that fact right there and propose a creator of the universe based on that through inductive reasoning, where you could say, well, here's the only place where this sort of thing comes from when you observe order in the universe, which we certainly do, and the only place where we see the material reality taking on a coherent structure, to where, like, say, in the DNA, where you have a very specific arrangement of molecules to reach a desired goal, which the end product would be a biological creation, or the end product is a functioning biological machine. And that only comes about through a very, very specific arrangement of molecules that would constitute a language, which only comes from mind. Yeah.
Maximus the Confessor, the great Eastern theologian, speaks of what you're talking about as the logoi, and he says that the logoi are many, and the many logoi are one in the logos. And this is just basically the idea of a unifying principle in metaphysics based around logos theology. And as we know, the logos is believed to be the eternally generated Son of the Father. So for Maximus, as an Eastern theologian, this completely revolutionizes his version of metaphysics. In other words, the Eastern presentation of metaphysics is quite unique in this regard. It does share similarities to Western theologians such as Aquinas or Augustine in terms of what they call divine exemplars, which is, again, just kind of a version of Platonism. But what you're saying about how these principles of meanings, which is what Maximus means by logoi, the archetypes or principles behind things or undergirding things, is their fixed status in terms of eternality. So almost you could view it like a mathematical equation of something, right? Even though a mathematical equation is somewhat limiting because it doesn't really describe the whole aspect of a person or being. It's merely one unifying way to think of a thing. But the principle or the pattern behind these things is very evident. And one more quote from Penrose that ties into what you're talking about. He says, "It's hard for me to believe, as some have tried to maintain, that such superb theories," and he's talking about really advanced mathematic theories, could have arisen merely by random natural selection. And this is what you would have to say on their view. Leaving only good ones as survivors, right? So as if some sort of survival of the fittest notion for really complex mathematical equations, which is completely retarded. Right, the good ones are simply much too good to be the survivors of ideas that have arisen from a random process. There must instead be some deep underlying reason for the accord between mathematics and physics, that is, between Plato's ideal formal world and the physical world. But see, none of these people understand that in order to have that bridge between those two realms, it requires quite a bit of beliefs that do not accord with materialism.
Oh, right. It doesn't. It will not lend itself to that. I mean, it is actually. I can't get over how just silly that the whole concept of, let's say, natural selection and
yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, you were saying the whole...
it's trying to call John. Let me see.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, when I reconnected the call, it automatically tries to connect everybody again. But yeah, I was saying that. Let's see, what was I saying?
You're saying natural selection.
Oh yeah, right, about natural selection. Yeah, so you're yeah. Let's try to like think through how this really goes down. You know, like how biological life is constantly evolving and changing. So so we could zoom in on the underlying structure, which is kind of this very specific order of molecules in this DNA, larger molecule of DNA, and so so we're waiting around for this piece of radiation to come down and just hit one of the molecules so that it pushes it over into a different arrangement that just so happens to be a very infinitesimally small and an unobservable progression towards some unforeseen future beneficial structure inside this organism that's gonna that is gonna later be evident in the whole progression of this random trial and error process of this random shuffling of molecules, and then but we can't observe it until it reaches the point where it will manifest itself into some sort of morphological change, like a new organ or a new. But we can't see it, but we're assured that this is happening all the time through all life. And that is just
it gets so ridiculous. Yes.
No, it is. Yeah, it is just absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense at all from what we're told about the underlying nature of biology, which is this mechanics that's nanotechnology that is where you have these miniature factories that are doing all the processes of the cell. And the cell itself is a product of this set of instructions that is in each cell that gets transferred to the other through the
right. That's key to understand that cells and human biology are nanotechnology.
Right.
DNA, RNA, that is nanotechnology, and in fact, human creations of nanotechnology are mirrored on the principles of nature. That's the great secret, of course, is that all of the stuff that DARPA does is all mirrored and based on nature. So you study light and physics and reality, and that's how you go and do all your super duper tech stuff. And a bunch of mathematics as well. And meanwhile, everyone in the world is told that what's true is chaos, meaningless nihilism, Darwinism. There are no metaphysics. Everything is Newtonian, atomism, materialistic process. Right. So I think they intentionally tell everyone a load of bull so that they'll be dumb and they won't figure anything out. And meanwhile, I'm quite confident they operate on a different metaphysic.
Oh yeah, you think so? Yeah, I tend to think so too.
Because if you have the metaphysic of Darwinism, something 200 years old, Newtonian atomism, there's no way you can make progress with completely incoherent systems. Now, I don't have all the details of like how elaborate that kind of a conspiracy is, but I know how systems work and how philosophy of systems analysis and all that works, and I know how logic works. And if you have completely faulty starting points, the end results are not going to work.
Right.
It's no different than believing. Look, building a computer, a highly complex piece of machinery, requires, in my view, so many metaphysical presuppositions for it to come to be that there's no way that you can continually advance in that kind of a system without some alternate kind of metaphysics where all of reality is meaningless craziness. Now, that does not mean that every computer scientist has to consciously be aware of all the aspects of some other version of metaphysics. It just means that the guiding ideas behind these things and for how they come to be and for how they progress into more and more complex forms suggests that they're not part of a completely chaotic universe. So I kind of make a reverse argument for objective creatologist type metaphysics actually based on a computer, because again, it all points back to these principles that we've outlined with Penrose, right? So what's required for that object to work is so many metaphysical, mathematical things that have to hold and be true that it almost brings with it an entire structure of reality, right? So, for example, you couldn't have just a simple one, regularity in nature, right? We know that this complex logic machine, the computer, is going to perform all these different functions, and it's unless it gets a virus or something like that, it's going to work tomorrow as well, right?
Right.
And so that means that all of the logic and math that went into making this is true. Now, propositions, mathematical equations, mathematical forms, numbers, they don't operate in isolation. They operate in unison with everything else in their set or in their group or whatever kind of grouping we're speaking of in this hypothetical case. So they necessitate and they mirror one another. They're all part of a whole, right? And so for a computer to be working, it requires a whole bunch of parts working in unison, logically and coherently. And that suggests not just truths about the computer itself, but in fact you can extrapolate logical and metaphysical truths about the rest of reality. So that means that the universe is actually structured such that you can build a machine like a computer, and these logical and metaphysical principles will hold over time, which means that the entire worldview that is presented of complete meaninglessness is not true. Now that's a little bit perhaps obscure, but I think the argument holds, again, based on the crucial point that any one of these algorithms or truths about electricity and the way electricity works or whatever, they do not operate in isolation. Okay, so they bring with them a host of metaphysical assumptions and truths about the world, and that itself is actually a big metaphysical truth, that they can work together in unison to perform a higher logical function than they do in isolation. Do you follow me?
Right. I say this from time to time. It's try to break it down to the most simplest terms I can. Is that, I mean, what reason is there for anything to work?
Yes. Right.
and the fact that the material world that we inhabit here, that things do work, and that it is so it's so evident to me that there's underlying principles involved to everything, a coherence to everything, that and what the examples you gave are really good examples of how you can take that and build upon it, but you're really just using what already exists to and reconfiguring it to a certain purpose, theologically, or the view that things have a purpose and intent, but behind them, and that, yes. That's the underlying the underlying nature of reality that is itself that you're dealing with. So it's something that is even beyond the bounds of evolution, natural selection, or any kind of process like that, because you're talking about something that exists within the inherent fabric of reality.
Right, and you're taking it even to another level and saying that I can combine a whole bunch of abstract principles and ideas, and I can create basically a magic mirror machine, a computer, a magic mirror, and it will continue to work and do processes that are quite amazing. So again, the high complexity of what all is involved in this machine, and for it to work, I have to stress, brings with it a whole bunch of metaphysical truths. Now, I'm not saying by this that means that transhumanism is true, and therefore, no, I'm just taking the computer itself as it is, this laptop in front of me, this iPhone, whatever, and saying, look at what all has gone into this. And in fact, as I understand, iPhones or Apple stuff now is so complex that it actually requires other computers to build iPhones. Now, that means that we're reaching a point where the sophistication and complexity of the technology is such that I mean, it's probably already unfathomable, at least in regards to what we know in the public realm. Mm-hmm. And that means, I think, that not that there's some great computer god. What I'm saying is that it suggests that this piece of machinery is built on a principle of mirroring things in nature that can only work if reality is highly structured. That's basically the point that I'm getting at.
No, I totally agree. It's this. You see it through the technology that's been created by humankind, that it proves, it makes the case for the ultimate creator that that this can be done, and it's through it's a product of consciousness. It's a product of mind.
And I'm not just making the argument of teleology, right? I'm not making the argument that of the blind watchmaker that, well, I found a watch, so that suggests that somebody designed it. No. I'm saying you could take any one of the equations or mathematical principles that go into building a computer, and you can take that, just like the propositions we were looking at earlier with the materialist scientistic type. Take that equation and consider it abstractly as itself. There are all kinds of metaphysical principles that are involved and are necessitated by how that can be true. And obviously it is true because it builds computers. And what that requires is an entire world that operates a certain way, right? And this is a principle that Leibniz elucidated many times, and I think he's right about this. So you can't have a world where tomorrow those principles are not going to be true. You can't have a world where tomorrow symbols no longer correspond to concepts and meaning. You can't have a world where suddenly time moves in reverse. You can't have a world where suddenly non-being turns into being. I don't know. I'm just thinking off the top of my head here.
Well, that's
and what we call these things in philosophy, we call them transcendentals or presuppositions. Kant overall is wrong. I do think he's right about this aspect, though. So what he calls transcendental categories that relate to the mind, he thinks it's all mental. He's actually, I think, correct insofar as what's a transcendental category in the mind actually corresponds to objective reality as well. So in other words, the fact that you can have these highly abstracted transcendental categories that are mental, the fact that you can build a computer shows that they translate into the external world as well. And if they translate into the external world, then that means that the fundamental fabric of the external world, the world as a whole, is actually psyche or mind, and that means that it has to be a divine mind, because there's no human mind that is the fundamental fabric of all reality.
Unless you want to invoke the multiverse theory.
Unless you want to be a New Ager and believe in scientism's version of religion, the multiverse, exactly.
Yeah, the multiverse, where everything is possible, and there is no improbable, because all possible configurations of reality exist somewhere, so that we're in the one reality or the one universe that has everything right, the anthropic principle that allows for the existence of life, and there's limitless universes out there that don't, and we just happen to be in the one that does. So we won the cosmic lottery, so to speak, and then that's how we're able to have these discussions. And it's really, I think, the only way to even make materialism remotely tenable as a philosophy is that because like all the stuff you went into, I think is known in the scientific community on to one extent or another, certainly, and it just inevitably is forcing everything into this one particular direction, where it's like, well, you have to deal with these fundamental underlying principles of the universe,
right?
That can't be that you can't get around it,
and you can't collapse those into the material realm and into the immediacy of the temporal and into a sort of linear flattening of all reality, right? So it's almost like Flatland, the Abbott Victorian novel by Abbott, where everything is 2D, and they have no conception of anything 3D, because they live, Mr. Square and Mr. Triangle live in a 2D world. So when someone tries to tell them about something 3D, they think he's crazy, because something 3D actually still looks 2D. Right? Because there actually is a great, I don't recommend Carl Sagan, but Carl Sagan has a good video on YouTube about a hypercube or a tesseract, which is 100% mathematically a true thing. There are tesseracts, they are mathematically certain, but we don't know exactly what that looks like or how it looks, right? And he gives a good explanation of a tesseract based on Abbott's book Flatland. Again, obviously Sagan was very much of the scientism crew, but yet another one of these mysterious members of scientism who also seems to promote these weird New Agey alienist ideas. So, for Sagan, this is how there are interdimensional beings, I guess, is because they exist in the dimension above ours. But again, I mean, it's odd to me that these people have no problem admitting higher dimensions based on mathematics, but anything that you call a spiritual realm is crazy.
No, it's just to me, it's just, I think the very definition of irrational thinking, or contradictory thinking, and
they've been very crafty in already framing any debate of this nature where anyone who believes in anything religious or metaphysical, that's already been relegated to the realm of fideism or a leap of faith. That's irrational. Right. Science, math, these are supposedly rational, when actually what's the case is that divide is far less clear than they would like it to be, because their beliefs in mathematical principles are also not empirically demonstrable, and so therefore they are in some sense faith-based. We don't empirically perceive mathematical principles. We just don't. Yet everyone believes in them.
Right. They can, but they're a product of mind, and they're a product of a process that a mind has undergone to arrive at those conclusions. And
yeah, but they stupidly believe that humans invented them.
That's the problem.
That was the point that Roger Penrose was making, who is one of the top mathematicians in the world at Oxford and the father of Penrose tiling. He says, "Do you realize how dumb it is to say that the Mandelbrot set is an invention of the human mind? It can't even be pictured accurately and completely by a computer."
Well, it's the whole when you're talking about the DNA molecule, and it has what was described as sequence specificity, where it is particular arrangement of molecules is it is actually analogous to a computer code to a large degree, to Absolutely. The point where it has subdirectories like your computer has a filing system. The DNA code has a filing system.
And as I understand, according to Douglas Hofstadter's Gödel Escher Bach book, he's one of the top. That's a Pulitzer Prize winning mammoth book that's really difficult. I still haven't completed the entire work because it's just so long. But he works in AI, just super smart guy. He brings up all these issues, and he says, "Look, RNA kind of prints the code, and we don't know. We don't know where this code comes from. We know it kind of comes out of this thing like a tape strip," he says. But we don't know why it does this or how it does this. He says it's a magical mystery, and this is one of the top AI guys. So, he's working on trying to build an AI system that mimics this thing that he says nobody has a clue how this is going on.
Yeah, I just recently ran across an article where it makes the statement that the DNA is not a code; it's actually an app. It's more analogous to it.
The DNA is what reads and runs it, and the RNA is what prints it.
Yeah,
as I understand.
So it is not. It's not that it's just taking a string of code and running it through and building it. There's also all this other stuff within the DNA that handles when it does it and how it does it and at what specific time, and the timing and the coordination of it, so it says, like, a better analogy would be like an application, like a computer app.
Correct. Yeah, he uses the analogy of the old school cassette, and then the tape head that would read the printed the magnetic strip. So the RNA is the printed strip, and then the DNA is the tape head that reads it and then kind of sings it into reality. Because actually, in my opinion, at a deeper level, sound is very much involved in a lot of this. And so if we look at something like cymatics, which is the way that different notes and frequencies produce patterns, which again harkens back to all that Pythagorean stuff, all of reality ultimately is operating at a different sound frequency ultimately.
Yeah, different vibrational fields that will,
and not in a super weird New Age sense, but actually in a very clear, defined mathematical sense.
Right, where I think what they talk about in quantum theory, where based on the observer, you're going to get to different behavior, right from the.
Yes, I have an argument as to why I think that is. Since we've gotten really deep here, there is a paper that I have linked into a couple articles at my site. One of them is called. Let's see. There's energetic aether metaphysics is one of the papers or one of the pieces I did. And there's another piece called Light and the Feel of Numbers that I did that I think mentions this. There's one more, Creation Metaphysics, I think, about Dr. Philip Sherrard. Anyway, one of those, or two of those, this is years ago, will cite a paper, pitt.edu, Pittsburgh University, and the paper is about Carl Jung and Wolfgang Pauli and their interactions. And there's an interesting argument that made there, and I'm not adhering to all the Gnostic principles of Carl Jung or any of that, but Pauli based all of his quantum physics on the metaphysics of Platonism. So that's how he was able to make quite a few pretty amazing discoveries, just like Werner Heisenberg. And what is posited in that paper between the Jung-Pauli interaction is the idea that, what I was saying earlier, the basis of reality has to be psyche, not just matter. Because
right.
if it's pure matter, then there's no way that we can bridge the gap between the archetypes in our mind or in our subconscious and meaning in the external world. And this is the whole problem that they were trying to deal with in their interactions back and forth. And so Pauli came to the conclusion that, well, Jung has to be right. I actually have to have some linking factor, some bridge that links the principles of thought in my mind, archetypes, and the principles that are operant out there in the world. And he says what that has to be is in some way psyche. Now, I would have caveats to that because I would not adhere to a full anima mundi, soul of the world principle of Platonism. But there's something kind of right about this in the sense that in the Eastern metaphysic it would be divine energy, would be the principle, the logos, the logoi, etc. The logoi are the principles of things, and because the mind is essentially a manifestation of logos, that's why there's a correspondence between the inner world of our thoughts and our soul and the external world of physical reality. And by the way, logos is in some way sound, the word of God, right? So the expression of divine meaning is why there's cymatics, why sound gives rise to form.
Yeah, and then there's the passage in the Gospel of John, in the beginning was a Word, and the Word was God, and the Word took on human form and walked among us. The logos, that's the word, the how it's translated in the Greek, is the Greek word is logos.
This idea, by the way, is also in other traditions. Now, I'm not at all advocating Hinduism, but the Hindus have an interesting conception of a thought form, which they call the yantra. So when you see mandalas, the yantra is the idea that you can invoke certain sounds or vibrations through looking at this image, and then intonation at a certain note or whatever for a certain period of time, and this, I guess, puts you in an altered state where you're contacting deities or something. But the idea is kind of the same here, where sound is given form in music, right? So we just have a bunch of sounds. They don't mean anything or particularly sound good, but we like music because it's sound given a specific ordered form. And so in the same way, logic is thought given form, and say geometry, for example, is math given form in space.
Right, and then the existence of a code or an app is something that is external, it's separate from the material, from the
Exactly.
the DNA molecule. It's not something that is necessarily inherent within the anything that is a materialistic property of the molecule. In other words, like, there is no like positive or negative charge that lends itself to organize itself in that particular way. It is something that is there, that is which in the same way, analogous to, like, if you were to take like a compact disc that has the works of Mozart, and you put it into your CD player, and it plays, you know, Mozart's compositions, and and then if you were to examine the material that is you know, being translated by your machinery in your, you know, CD player, you're going to see just information that is taken on the form of, you know, different bits and bytes of, you know, like computer code, or that gets translated and turned into something
Right.
through a process that is, you know, coherent, and then, you know, it can invoke emotions, or, you know, whatever, you know, the music does, or what you're listening to it for. And it is something that is external and separate from the material itself. Like, it's there's only one way that you can get Mozart music on a CD, and that's a very specific arrangement of those bits and bytes that is imprinted into that material. And in the same way, the DNA molecule is just that. It's just, you know, you have the molecule, but you have the specific arrangement of those of the different molecules themselves that is within that larger molecule that can, you know, can take out in different arrangements depending on what type of organism that you're talking about. But yeah, when it's expressed, it is going to give you a result that is you know, a coherent result that is only an expression of the information that is
Right.
that is there. It has nothing to do with the material itself. The material itself is only a vehicle for the
Exactly,
information.
which is why I like Hofstadter's analogy of the cassette tape playing music, right? Because when this strip is sent out and it's expressed, it's as if it's playing a tune.
Yeah, and then where did that come from?
Exactly.
Where does that come from? Is
No
like,
one knows.
Right, no one knows, and then there's no really logical explanation given other than random chance, like a random chance process, which is random mutation and natural selection, which natural selection can't create by definition. It can only select, so it only can select the product of random shuffling.
Correct. Yeah, and I should have been a little clearer, I think, earlier when I was talking about the Timaeus and the sort of molecular or atomic structure of reality. What I was getting at was the Platonic solids, as they're called in classic geometry and mathematics. So if you look at the dodecahedron and these different polygons and forms like this, these are what make up nature in the world. And that's really what we're talking about here. Is just, you can, if we go from our level of reality, then we go down to the molecular, and then we go down to the atomic, and then we go down even further, possibly. Same with what you're talking about with the body, and then down to the cell, and then down to the DNA. This is the principle that the Greeks called nomon, which is what I was, talking about at the beginning, and that's just that the smaller levels are mirrored in the larger levels, like a hologram. Mm-hmm. And that shows, again, that at these different levels, it's all harmonious and operating in a certain structured way. It's not random and happenstance, chaotic. It's highly, highly structured, and that's ultimately the complete disproof of that whole nonsense, meaningless chaos worldview. And it's staring them right in the face every day. But they're so. This is just the flaw of fallen humans. They're so sold on an ideology that they've been indoctrinated with that they think gives them sort of the upper hand. What I wrote about in my IQ psyops and civilization piece, that there's an ego wall. The ego operates as a firewall that I think sort of tends to battle internally between what men intuitively directly know is true, that they suppress in favor for some lie that they think will give them security and ultimately divinity, and it's a lie. It's a ruse.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it is. It's so contradictory. I mean, it's so self-contradictory. It's amazing how it is just continually, perpetuated, and it is not based on observation. It's based solely on just which I believe is techniques that sophistry and ways to manipulate thought.
Fallacy of authority. Well, the Royal Society said this. It is therefore true.
Right, and then so you take the position yourself that at some of the higher levels that they have a completely different philosophical view that allows them to do real sciences.
I'm of that opinion based on evidence that people have seen me, that have sent me in statements I've seen from Kurt Gödel's is a classic example. So there's a blog called Gödelian Mysteries, and they have a site there, or they have a post there about this very thing, where Gödel discussed his shock when he realized what Bertrand Russell was really saying, that everyone would be brainwashed and ultimately killed in the coming technocratic state. And so he was surprised to, as he said, discover a conspiracy to make men dumber. That's what Gödel said.
Yeah.
And I'm of the opinion that this may be why he was believed to be insane in his later days. It's entirely possible he actually was threatened or persecuted because he was considered the greatest logician of the 20th century. And here he is freaking out because of what he's realized Bertrand Russell and his crew, cabal, want to do. And we've seen this, I think, with, again, this is just speculation on my part, but we've seen this with different, math geniuses of this caliber. John Nash. There's some weird interactions between John Nash and the NSA that are hinted at in Beautiful Mind. Who knows? I'm not saying for certain that he didn't just go crazy or wasn't schizophrenic or whatever, but we just don't know. And of course, the establishment is not beyond. As Bertrand Russell said, you don't go along, you're dead.
Right. Yeah.
Particularly amongst the academic class, is who he's talking about. He's saying we really have to worry about prominent academic types who don't go along.
Yeah, there's this. I wish I could remember, because it's been a while since I've seen this documentary, and I can't even remember the name of it. I wish I could remember the name of it. But what it goes into, and the name will probably pop into my head as I'm talking about it. But it is going into how biology goes through different processes in its developmental cycles, where, like, the embryo will have it will create a lot of cells that later on get discarded, and there's sort of this scaffolding that gets built, and then later on is discarded, and then that is like something that's sort of a fundamental process of organizing life, and it's seen throughout nature. And so this whole observation has been taken, I believe, by the elite. It doesn't really spell this out in this documentary, but I kind of gathered that while I was watching it, and I said, well, I think this is sort of kind of intrinsic in the belief system of the elite classes, in that they see society, or the unwashed masses, or the proletariat, or whatever you want to call the population in general, as a part of a process that is analogous to what you observe in nature, to where they see it as sort of like it is a part of the evolution of mankind in order to achieve this ideal utopia, or this greater society, that that scaffolding, or that the extraneous masses will have to at a certain point in the evolution of this process.
They're sort of like
the discarded.
They're the dead skin cells that are discarded.
Right.
This is the model of Plato in the Republic, where he classifies men according to different metals. Paul as well uses this analogy in Corinthians. So you can have in Plato bronze, silver, gold classes of men, and this goes into sort of the metallurgical analogy for the Republic. And this also fits into Plato's creatology, or his cosmogony, in terms of the Timaeus, where the universe is conceived of as a body, a being, or that macrocosmic principle that Maximus the Confessor also writes about. And in this regard, the gold men are the men, the wise men, the elite, those who are the philosopher kings, and then of course below them the guardian class, the silver, and then you have the unwashed masses who function as the sort of the external body.
Right.
And this is the classic Hermetic alchemico, allegory of not just civilization's process, not just the Republic's process, not just the individual's process, and not just history's process, but the entire universe's process.
Yeah, and the name of this documentary I was trying to think of is called, I'm pretty sure this is it, is Death by Design, where parallel worlds meet, the life and times of life and times.
Oh, that sounds neat. I'll have to watch that. Now that idea pops up often, where you see them talking about how they need to kind of do a kickstart for evolution, right?
Right.
Yeah,
that's eugenics.
So, exactly, and even some of the nuclear madmen theorists. I understand your position on nukes, but you see some of the RAND people even kind of thinking, well, maybe we need some kind of, if not nuclear, global war can in some way propel the process of evolution in a kind of a man-made, punctuated equilibrium.
Right. Yeah. That's what they're into. That's what they're about. I believe that from,
which is also a Marxist idea. Marx's idea was that you could only have progress through dialectical clash, which is why Marx wrote a dedication to Darwin for Das Kapital.
Yeah, and it's all based on these concepts, which are observed in nature, and then the whole materialistic view outlook of biology and how why it exists. I think Well, I mean, it does lend itself to that if you're just looking at from that purely materialistic standpoint of, okay, mankind we're simply animals, and that's all we are, and we're just a product of these chemical processes. And
right, and then that's where the noble lie comes in, is that they see religion and state-run religion as a necessary evil because of the stupidity of everyone. It's like when this is sort of the point of the apology, is that from their perspective, Socrates trying to free those entrapped by the phantasms and shadows on the wall of the cave, they are mad at him for doing that. That they would rather kill him and be entranced by the phantasms and the shadows than to actually know what's true. So for them, the allegory of the cave is something a little different. So it ties more so into the noble lie, the idea that the state has to create a religious deception because that's how you manage populations. That's how you manage the herd that way.